Welcome in, everybody, to Fantasy Pros. It's the Fantasy Football Podcast right here. It is me, it is Yates, and it's you. Tags is still on vacation, still priming away. Don't worry. I heard he actually did make it out and actually did a few things on vacation, which is good. But we've got a great show for you today on the Football Podcast here at Fantasy Pros because we are going to go through with Kyle Yates some important dynasty assets, because this is that time of year where we're right before the draft where people are looking to maybe make some moves and make some acquisitions and maybe even get out on a few players. So we're going to go position by position today on Fantasy Pros, and we're going to give you those names, and we're going to talk about them and whether or not we want to be moving on from them, buying or selling certain entities in Dynasty Football. And again, if you can't get enough Dynasty Football, make sure you're listening to Kyle Yates and Ray Garvin on the Dynasty Football Podcast here on Fantasy Pros. So Yates, as I said, this is it. This is that hotbed of movement when it comes to Dynasty and Keeper Leagues, where people are looking back at their rosters, trying to figure out, should I rebuild? Is this asset at its peak? Is it time to move on? Or is it time to maybe pounce and take advantage of an asset when it's at its lowest point? So I feel like this is the perfect pod at the perfect time for everybody out there in that situation.
Absolutely. I mean, you've got the people who always play fantasy football, right? As soon as the Super Bowl ends, they're right back into it, and they're looking and trying to figure out how they can best utilize their rosters for next season. But then you've got the people who want that little bit of a break, that still play Dynasty, but they want that little bit of a break just to step away. And now is the time that they're putting both feet back into the water and saying, all right, let's figure out how I can make my team better for next season. So yeah, really looking at capitalizing on that time frame and saying, all right, here's the lay of the landscape. We've got free agency past us. The draft is upcoming. Still, some things could shake out. We're going to talk through a ton of different scenarios here. I'm really looking forward to it.
Yeah, me too, man. And for all those people that Kyle's talking about that just never sleep with this stuff, that's what the Dynasty Draft Simulator is made for over at Fantasy Pros. Go to fantasypros.com/simulator, and you can run through all the different simulations there. And of course, the Dynasty Football Podcast, as I talked about, Dynasty Fantasy Football Podcast, so good. You guys do such a great job. I've been listening to the show. I even quoted Ray on something he said in a piece that I just did a little spot there for on fantasypros.com. So I'm telling you, everybody can learn from everybody. That's the whole point of this. So before we kind of kick into gear with things, I want to remind everybody we're doing that contest. Thanks to our friends at PristineAuction.com. We got the Justin Jefferson autographed jersey up there. So you go to fantasypros.com/contest and you can get involved in that. Again, super easy. All you do is you take a screenshot of a review that you've written about the podcast and the shows. You go back over to fantasypros.com/contest. You upload that, you fill out the form, and boom, just like that, you are entered to win Justin Jefferson autographed jersey. I mean, come on. Did anyone see this guy play last year? The value can only go up, let me tell you. So again, thanks to our friends at Pristine Auction, that's available, so go in there and get involved. It's free, it's fun, free swag, Kyle. I mean, it doesn't get better than that. Kyle's got the swag going out there too. As you can watch on our YouTube channel, he's got the jerseys now behind him. He's starting to filter in. I saw you wearing the Matt Forte jersey the other day too. Nice look. I like the old school Matt Forte. He doesn't get enough love in my opinion.
There we go.
All right, so we're going to start with the running backs today here, Kyle. So I want to start with a running back who happens to be someone that I own in my giant 32-team Dynasty league. Yes, I know. It's absurd. It's crazy. We have the dupe players in there. I've talked about it a few times before. But we've got CMC, and we're getting a ton of offers on Christian McCaffrey right now. And some of them are pretty good. We're getting some pretty good hauls there. But I'm going to ask you this question. Whenever we have a player who's missed time with an injury, especially a running back, we start to ask this question of, okay, where are we with this player? Have we seen the best of him? Is that 2-year window the best in the peak? Should we sell now before he comes back and continues to deal with more injuries? Or is that a foolish thing to do because we're talking about the 1-1 potentially in all of fantasy football?
Yeah, when you look at Dynasty startups right now, you're still going to have the 101 as Christian McCaffrey, regardless of the time that he missed last year, because when he is on the field, it is hard to find another running back who's going to get the type of workload that McCaffrey is. So when we're talking about a buy or sell, it's really hard for me to sit here and say, yeah, sell him, because he's coming back off the end. I really, I quite frankly don't care, because even when he is on the field, he's going to get that guaranteed workload. And now you have Sam Darnold, who I think is going to be the guy who's going to be more willing to check it downfield or check it down even more to Christian McCaffrey. So we could even be seeing him come back and get even more of a workload, which is just crazy to think about. So I'm sitting here and I'm just going to say, if I can buy him, even if it's going to cost me a ton, I'm perfectly willing to do that. I'm not willing to sell Christian McCaffrey, even after him coming off of that injury.
Yeah, I tend to agree with you. I think it would take a huge haul. Maybe we could talk about what that might look like, but We didn't see him with Matt Rule and Joe Brady last year, and we saw that offense run so well, and we continuously hear compliment all the play calling that went on there at Carolina last year. And I guess my question to you is, what would it take to even, let's say you want to pry away Christian McCaffrey? Let's say you want to buy him, right? Do you have to start with, a first or second overall pick in the Dynasty, rookie draft? What else on top of that does it take, do you think, to even get that kind of a deal done for basically the 1-1 as we're talking about?
Yeah, with McCaffrey, I think we saw him in 3 games last season, and in those 3 games, it was just a ridiculous workload and just ridiculous fantasy production. So that if you're going to go out there and try to acquire Christian McCaffrey, you are going to have to pay up. You are going to have to sacrifice a ton, especially when in consideration that he's going as the 101 in typical 1 QB dynasty startups, like you mentioned. So with Christian McCaffrey, you've got to start the offer with 2 first-round picks, and they've got to be guaranteed high first-round picks. And then you've got to throw in another running back on top of it, maybe even a young and up-and-coming wide receiver. Like, it's going to have to be a haul. And I will say this, before we ask this question for every single player that we're going to talk about, dynasty values, and I get this all the time on Twitter and questions and mailbags and stuff like that. Like, do you think that I could get this player for this overall draft pick? And it's so difficult to assess that and give an honest answer because each league is completely different.
Sure.
Each roster is completely different, where one player, a player that we'll talk about here in a second, Joe Mixon, if you have Joe Mixon and he's your RB1 on your roster, you're going to be much more hesitant to sell that player away versus if he's your RB3, RB4 on your roster, right? Like an expendable piece that then you can ship away and get more value. So context is key when trying to assess dynasty values. So I'll just say this with Christian McCaffrey, know that if you are going to go chasing after him, you've got to bring everything that you've got.
Well, I agree with that sentiment, and I also 100% agree with the sentiment of you must absolutely understand the context of the deals you're making. And it goes for every trade that you make. Redraft too. I mean, it's just it's not enough to say, would you do this for this? Well, you need a little bit more information. You have to go way past the format. It's got to be what the roster construction is and where you're at in the league and the standings and so many other things like that. So that's a great point that Kyle brings up. It's something you all should consider on your own. And if you're listening to the show, you're smart enough to have those kind of conversations with yourself. And if Tags were here, he could interview himself about those conversations.
Right, exactly.
Because he's so good at that. Yeah. See, when he's not here, he can't defend himself, which is fun.
Exactly.
But we miss him. We love you, Tags. We're glad you're getting some time on your own. Let's talk about Miles Sanders, because I feel like now there's rebirth of hope in Philadelphia, and I think it's having a trickle-down effect. It's having a trickle-down effect on Jalen Reagor, which we'll talk about later. Obviously, with Jalen Hurts, people are excited about the potential of him in fantasy. Is that kind of bleeding over into Miles Sanders, and if so, does that make him a buy at this point or a sell, maybe because the value's at its peak?
Well, it really is difficult where, yes, we have the buy, we have the sell, but I actually think that there's a third option that's kind of hold, right? Because to go out and buy Miles Sanders, he's got the name recognition where you're not going to get him at a value point that would be worth sending away that draft capital or, whatever player you would have to send away to get Miles Sanders. He's not at his highest value because you do have the threat of Jalen Hurts as a mobile quarterback going to take away overall rush attempts. They're still going to throw the ball. So then that's a smaller piece of the pie that Miles Sanders will be getting. Now, Sanders has the talent to be incredibly efficient in his opportunities, so he's still going to be a viable fantasy producer and everything like that. But yet he doesn't have that, his value isn't at the highest peak where then when you sell him, you're going to be getting, as much return on investment as you can. So I really think with Miles Sanders, it's an in-between option where we're saying, if you've got him, that's great. Hold on to him. You're probably going to have a solid RB2 in fantasy next season, right on that edge, probably a high-end running back too. But outside of that, unless you want to go and send away significant draft capital, if you've got one of those top 5 rookie picks, top 6 or whatever, where you can get your hands on a Najee Harris, a Javonte Williams, or Travis Etienne, the 3 running backs that are kind of in that top tier, the consensus top tier for rookie drafts, I'd honestly be holding on to them and taking one of them over Miles Sanders.
Yeah, I got a question for you. Would you prefer to be making these kind of moves before the draft unfolds? Knowing what you know, let's say you're a really well-versed, you're working your butt off here. You are really into your fantasy league and specifically your dynasty format. Are you somebody that wants to take advantage of where, the values are before the draft because you know how to manipulate that board potentially in that first round rookie class?
It really is dependent upon the situation. So when you look at Philadelphia with Miles Sanders, let's focus in on that. When you look at Miles Sanders, that they just brought Jordan Howard back. They're probably not going to be bringing in another high profile running back, right? Like, of course, NFL teams can absolutely go AWOL, and they can bring in a player that you did not expect to see happen. Hello, Jordan Love in Green Bay. So like that can be, or AJ Dillon in Green Bay.
Yeah, I was gonna
those type of situations can happen, but to the point where it would affect and like you try to. It's going to be situation dependent is what it all comes down to. So when you're looking at the wide receiver or running back that you've got on your roster or that you want to go acquire, you really have to sit down and say, okay, what draft capital, how many draft picks does this team have? Are they going to be willing to spend one of those on this key position? So Seattle with Chris Carson, they've got 3 total draft picks in this entire draft. They're going to trade down, but yet is it going to be a situation then where they're going to spend one of those 3 picks on a running back? No, probably not. So Chris Carson is probably safe to go and acquire because he doesn't have the threat of someone else coming in and taking some of that workload, if that makes sense.
Well, I'm glad we're talking about Chris Carson because he was on this list as well. So me personally, I'm more like you. I'm more of the hold or even sell potentially because I think there's a little notion of, well, let's hold him because we don't know what the new coaching regime there is going to be and how it's going to affect Miles Sanders right now that I think there's enough. Always everybody wants to look on the sunny side of things and not the downside potentially of stuff, because this wasn't the guy that was drafted by this regime. So to me personally, I would try to sell off that, or like you said, hold, because maybe it is good, maybe it is better, maybe there's more of a commitment to him. What about Chris Carson? Since he is on our list to talk about, we kind of just touched on him today. He has re-upped there with Seattle. In your opinion, does that make him a valuable asset to hold or to buy or to sell?
This was an interesting situation that Ray and I were talking about on the Dynasty Football podcast, and we said, like, hey, sell Chris Carson before free agency. We said sell Chris Carson if you've got him because his value is about to just take a nosedive because all signs were pointing to him leaving Seattle, right? He was kind of on that last year of his contract saying, like, it's a prove-it situation to see if he can stay healthy, and he didn't stay healthy. So it was signaling to us that he's probably not going to get the money that he wants in Seattle to be that starting running back. And then if he hits the open market, there really aren't that many situations available where he's going to be the pure workhorse back that he was in Seattle. Well, like, it surprised us that he ends up back in Seattle, and now he is going to be the main guy in this offense with Russell Wilson, most likely like 99% at this point, staying in Seattle. Well, it can be nothing but great things for Chris Carson from a fantasy perspective. So if you can get him super cheap, now I'm not gonna be willing to spend more than a 2nd-round pick. Like, once you get past the top tier that I mentioned of Najee Harris, Javonte Williams, Travis Etienne, you have some other guys, other running backs that could make an impact. Kenneth Gainwell from Memphis, Michael Carter from North Carolina. But outside of that, it really does. This entire class just takes a drastic jump off a cliff. So I think if you can if you know that you're at the point in your draft where all 5 of those top guys are going to be gone, and you can send away that mid-2nd round pick to go get Chris Carson as a depth piece or an RB3 for your roster, then I'm perfectly fine with that. I'm not sending away a 1st-round pick to go acquire Chris Carson, though.
All right, I want to talk about Joe Mixon for a moment here and switch gears because I think this is one of the more polarizing ones. I think it's very important because I think we all had a really good impression there of Joe Burrow and his first shot in the NFL. I think there was a lot of good things we liked. If indeed we do think they're going to fortify the line, which I think is what consensus we all think they should do. We'll see if they actually do that. But that seems to where the ball is going. Joe Mixon's very difficult. Now, last year I was somebody who was in on Joe Mixon quite a bit, and I got burned. And I'm trying to negotiate with myself again. Okay, now you have to put that aside. Just because a player burns you and things didn't work out, you can't always necessarily just write them off forever. However, in the Dynasty format, even though things seem to be going on the uptick with that Cincinnati offense, my question to you is it taking Joe Mixon along with him? Or are we at a point now where we've seen so much disappointment in this asset that it's time to just move on? Because this could be the last time you move on with Joe Mixon at any sort of value.
It's really interesting. I was talking with my best friend. We met up for coffee this past Saturday, and actually, like, sitting in a coffee shop. It was incredible. It was the first time I've done that in, like,
wait, you went out with a friend
what is a coffee shop?
That's
right?
Crazy.
What is that?
What a crazy idea!
Coffee shop. And he brought up fantasy football, and he's like, "You were hyping up Joe Mixon last year, weren't you?" I was like, "Yeah, I definitely was." And he's like, "I just can't. I can't get there." He's like, he's burned me so many times. And I get it. Like, he's had the injury concerns, this, and this, but yet he's still only 24 years old.
I know, that's what I come back to, Kyle. And I'm that guy. I'm the same as you. I was the one hyping Joe Mixon last year too. And I keep looking at the age, and I'm looking at the situation, and I'm trying to tell my brain logically, buy everywhere because it could be really good. And they made a commitment to him. It's not like they haven't made a commitment to him from a team. So I think that's why I'm leaning that way towards the buy. Does that also have its influence for you?
Absolutely. The long-term contract is there in place. You have Joe Burrow now in place. You have the commitment to investing in the offensive line now in place. We're going to see that happen in the NFL draft. The only thing pointing against Joe Mixon at this point is the injury history. And it's all relative to the cost. When you look at his ADP right now in Dynasty startups, we just did a Dynasty startup mock draft. I got Joe Mixon as my RB3 on my Dynasty roster. You're telling me that Giovanni Bernard is no longer in town. This coaching staff gave a clear motivation to give Joe Mixon the workload. He's getting 25 plus touches per game. You're telling me that I can get that as my RB3 in Dynasty right now? That's worth the injury risk. Even if I get 12 games out of Joe Mixon to be my RB3, sign me up all day long. Now, if I have to go acquire him, I do think that you're going to have some people like yourself and my friend who are just saying, like, I'm burnt out. Like, I don't want Joe Mixon on my roster anymore. Just get him off my roster. Then that is the situation where you buy. And I would be going in every Dynasty league I'm in, I would be going out and making offers for Joe Mixon if I didn't already have Joe Mixon on all of my Dynasty rosters because I was I was so in on him last year. So I've got Joe Mixon as like an RB2, RB3 on my Dynasty rosters, and I'm feeling great about it heading into next year.
This is a good conversation. This is very therapeutic, I think, for all of us who are very in on Joe Mixon. It's good to hear everybody kind of say it's okay to go back to that well. And then look, if he burns you another time, then I understand. And there's a huge risk because if he does burn you, now there's no value in the trade. It's going to be very difficult to move on from him in a Dynasty format. But I'm kind of where Kyle is. He's a little bit further ahead in the process of the 12-step process of trying to overcome last year's Joe Mixon disappointment. But I'm getting there. I'm getting there slowly, and I've already started work on the Black Book, and I'm looking at it. I'm like, 24, they made a commitment. Things are going the right direction. I think one more time, so we'll see how that goes. Now, the other thing that goes a long way towards that Joe Mixon recovery is a good night's sleep. And our friends at My Sheets Rock, who sponsor our show today, they know a thing or two about that. Let me tell you, I personally like to sleep when it's cold. I like the cold sleep kind of thing. And the great thing about these sheets are they actually are regulatory sheets. And we've got them. I know, Kyle, you've got them too. And you've actually already talked about them quite a bit, I believe, and you're a big positive. The wife's a big fan. Everybody's a big fan.
Yes.
But I think that's amazing. I'm telling you, it's not like anything you've ever seen or experienced out there before. They're designed specifically to keep hot sleepers cool and cold sleepers comfortable. Don't ask me how it works. It just does. It's unbelievable. They regulate temperature, they moisture wick, and they stay breathable, and they're soft. You can sleep in them comfortably at night. I got the cool black ones because, I got to stay on brand with the Black Book and that whole thing. That's because these sheets are made from the best in-class bamboo rayon, the holy grail of sheeting. This miracle material transfers body heat 2 times more effectively than regular sheets and reduces humidity by 50%, so you can experience the best night's sleep ever. And I'm telling you, some of these reviews online are incredible. Henry S. says, it's as soft as a dolphin's body. I mean, what more do you need than that? All right, and I've been to Cancun, I've pet the dolphins, I've done the whole thing. It's fantastic. So here's what you're going to do. If you don't believe me, go check out the reviews online, 5-star customer reviews for themselves. Plus, they offer a 90-day risk-free trial, so it doesn't cost you anything, and free shipping on all the returns. So check out My Sheets Rock at mysheetsrock.com/pros and enter that code PROS for 10% off and free shipping. Again, that's mysheetsrock.com/pros. Again, and use that code PROS for 10% off and free shipping. Now, Kyle, now that we're well rested and had a little break here, let's get into another running back who now has more company, and it's Josh Jacobs. Now, Jacobs is in a scenario here where I don't know what you do with him. I think it's a fascinating opportunity if you believe he's going to respond from the people that got brought in here with Kenyon Drake. But then I look at the offensive line year over year, and I think that's where I kind of get to a halt. So I think if you can sell Jacobs off of the, hey, he's motivated, still young, maybe somebody thinks they're being kind of cagey by getting him, this might be your opportunity to get out from Josh Jacobs. And I like the guy. I have met the guy personally. He's got an incredible story. He's an incredible dude. But we're talking business here. And business, to me, this is a sell regardless. What are your thoughts on Josh Jacobs with the Raiders this year in Dynasty?
Yeah, with Kenyon Drake coming over, that was something that was enough to tick him down in my Dynasty rankings a couple of spots, right? You knew that it really has not been that different from Theo Riddicks to the Jalen Richard.
Right.
They've always had someone there in that pass-catching role in Las Vegas, whereas you have Josh Jacobs, who is a perfectly capable receiver out of the backfield. It's probably one of his greatest strengths. But they've always had that. So it ticked him down a couple spots in my rankings, but it was the just overhaul to the offensive line, which was the strength of this team, to drop him down my rankings. I've got him as a low-end running back too in my dynasty rankings now. So if you can sell Josh Jacobs, and you are going to have to put on your salesman cap to sell Jacobs for peak value for
have I got a deal for you, Sonny? Check
right,
this
exactly.
out.
If you can
sell, you sell them off age and motivation factor, right? Like
you've got to find the angle. You've got to really work this. And if you can't sell Jacobs for a first round pick, then like go change whatever career that you're in right now and go into sales, because you have a great future in it. Like that is going to be the situation here where Jacobs, I think, if you can hold on to him as a depth piece on your dynasty roster, if you don't have to rely on him as anything more than an RB2, then great. I don't think that you have to sell him, because you are going to be selling him pretty low. But if you have to rely on him as your RB1 on your roster, you're in a really, really bad spot heading into next season.
All right, let's go to a guy that you picked up off the waiver wire last year, even in dynasty leagues, okay? It's James Robinson. Came out of nowhere. He's a complete plus right now. Right? So he's a plus in terms of productivity, because you plucked him off the waiver wire for a few bucks maybe. I mean, who knows? Most people didn't spend a whole lot. They just kind of speculated, and then ended up with a guy who just had an incredible return. Probably the best waiver wire pickup of the year in many cases. Yeah. Now what do you do? Do you hold and say, hey, James Robinson's just a bonus, he's getting a better quarterback in Trevor Lawrence? Or do you say, well, Trevor Lawrence is coming in. This offense is going to be much different. New coaching staff, new everything. This guy was third on the depth chart going into the season anyway last year. I'm going to get out while the getting's good because the value isn't any higher. I tend to lean towards sell when I see a guy come out of nowhere. It's how I felt about Raheem Mostert, who had been on, 5 teams, I think, in 2 or 3 years. Mm-hmm. I kind of automatically, you see a guy kind of pop from that, boom, you sell off, because normally you could turn that into something more reliable. Do you feel the same way about James Robinson, or are you just riding the wave?
I really am considering selling James Robinson if I've got him on my dynasty roster, and it is because of the value point at where you picked him up and his value right now in dynasty leagues. There are people who are just all in on James Robinson, and I get it from the workload and what he handled last year. Now, I do not think that he is going to get anywhere near that type of workload again in 2021. They're going to bring in a pass-catching running back. They've brought in Carlos Hyde to spell him a few times, but that's just a veteran presence. I don't think that does anything for James Robinson's value. But then you do have the potential that the scoring opportunities increase for Robinson in this offense, where if you do project Trevor Lawrence is going to come in and take this offense to another level, well, then absolutely. But all of this goes together to say, if you can sell Robinson for a top 5 pick right now, I'm doing that, because that difference of talent is crazy. To go from
what about
an
a top
undrafted
10 pick too?
Top 10 is kind of where I'm borderline.
Because you have the quarterbacks, you have the receivers, and the running backs here in this class, and I feel like you're kind of pushing into that 8-9 a little bit with some of those talents.
It also depends on your needs. So if you are good on running back and you need a wide receiver, then I'm more willing to do that move for a top 10. That's a really good point. Right? Because at that point, the wide receiver class is so deep that I'm fine taking a Rashad Bateman at the end of the first round, and I feel like I drastically won that trade going from James Robinson to Rashad Bateman. But yet, to go from a top 5 pick where you can make that talent jump from an undrafted free agent. Now, remember, I scout rookies, and I scouted I watched over 500 games of tape on last year's class. It was ridiculous. I didn't even know the name James Robinson. So Robinson really came out of nowhere, and we all know that. We all know he came out of nowhere, but he went even under my radar. So to go from an undrafted free agent to a top 5 rookie pick where you're getting guaranteed one of Najee Harris, a Travis Etienne, or Javonte Williams, one of those 3 players, that is a clear win for me, where I can lean and fall back on talent versus the situation that they're in, because situations change. Talent stays the same.
Agreed. All right, let's move on to another asset here, and then we'll continue on with wide receivers. I want to talk about Clyde Edwards-Helaire real quick. Tell me about his status right now, because this one from a player that I know a lot of us were excited about, and then I felt like overall the train just kind of got out of control. When it got into the first round value last year into a lot of redraft leagues, I thought, oh my goodness, this is a little much here. I'm out here. I was very excited when I saw the draft. I said, oh, this is a great spot. I love this. I'm going to speculate there. And then when I saw what you had to pay in redraft, I wasn't for it. But now we're in dynasty conversation. So I know you saw glimpses last year. I guess the overall question is it going to get better here in the second and third year, or is this kind of what the role of running back in the Chiefs offense is, which is, let's face it, second fiddle to Patrick Mahomes and whenever he feels like he wants to do?
It's a weird situation here with CEH because you go from the 101 like consensus. People were taking him there because it's the running back in Patrick Mahomes' offense. Like I totally got it, and yeah, it did reach a point last year in redraft leagues where I was like, oh, okay, let's back off the hype just a little bit. Yeah. But I think it was once Damian Williams opted out that it skyrocketed, right?
Yep.
So with CEH from a dynasty perspective, you're definitely not looking at the value of the 101, right? His value is taking a dip from there. He's more of a mid-range RB2 now because we know that it's not necessarily so much about the talent. I do think that CEH is an incredibly talented running back, but it is now about the offense, how very little that they run the ball, and then how very little CEH is used as a receiver out of the backfield. With Patrick Mahomes, he's pushing the ball deep downfield, right? We all know this. So if he was playing with an Andy Dalton and Alex Smith, then sign me up for CEH as a top 5 fantasy running back because he's going to be getting those dump off passes all game long. But that's just not the case with Patrick Mahomes. So I think he's one of those guys that falls into the Miles Sanders camp for me where you hold him, right? Because you're not going to be able to. He is still the running back in Andy Reid and Patrick Mahomes' offense. So that has value, but no one is giving you the value that you spent, right? The draft capital that you spent on him last year as the 101, no one's giving you that. So I feel like you've just got to kind of ride this wave out and hope that they start to move towards involving him in the passing game or giving him the ball on the ground a little bit more.
Everybody kept talking about, well, it's Andy Reid, and look at the history of Andy Reid offenses and what he's done with all these running backs, except they forgot all those offenses. The one thing they had in common, they didn't have Patrick Mahomes, and it's just a little bit different. Like Kyle's saying, they're able to do things and throw the ball downfield, and he's able to make plays that no other human can. As we switch gears here from running back to wide receiver, I want to remind everybody you can go and watch the podcast. That's right, over on Fantasy Pros. Make sure you subscribe to Fantasy Pros for all of our YouTube content. All you can do is click subscribe and then the notifications button. And every time you get a new show come out, boom, you are right there and you can watch it on your mobile device or wherever you like. And I can't believe we're going to talk about this next guy because here we are a year later, one of the guy's top talents in football. Now so much uncertainty when it comes to Michael Thomas. And I wanted to get your take on this, Kyle, because it's fascinating in Dynasty. You're talking about talent before, right? There's no denying the talent. There's no denying the work ethic. He's coming off an injury. He's coming off some issues here with, some problems with getting along with some people and a lot of rumblings about what was going on there behind the scenes. That always enters into things, and it should in your Dynasty scenarios especially. And now, of course, you got the quarterback change with no Drew Brees. So where are you at? Are you buying or selling Michael Thomas? Or like you said, maybe that third option of hold?
Context is key with Michael Thomas in this situation, and you've got to determine the context at this point, right? Because looking at Taysom Hill and Jameis Winston, those are two drastically different quarterbacks. We all know this. If you have Michael Thomas with Taysom Hill, yes, he'll be fine, but he won't return that value of a top-tier fantasy asset. If you believe that Jameis Winston is going to be the quarterback for New Orleans next season, I might be a little bit more inclined to hold on to Michael Thomas because Jameis Winston has proven that he can support some wide receivers for fantasy football. We know that. Sure. So you've really got to make that decision. I don't know if you necessarily have to make that now, but you at some point you're going to have to make that decision on what you believe the context is going to be for Michael Thomas. If you are 100% convinced that Taysom Hill is going to be the quarterback for Michael Thomas, and you can find someone in your league who is convinced that it's going to be Jameis Winston, that is an opportunity for a trade in your Dynasty League where you can get value for MT. And it's also important to consider that Michael Thomas is now 28 years old. Like, he's not 24. He's not 25. Like, he's an older Dynasty asset now to the point where you might want to consider moving on if you can get that peak value. Another way to consider it would be hold on to him for the first few weeks of the season. And then once he has that big game, right? Because all these receivers are going to have one big game at one point or another. That's the moment where you sell high, on Michael Thomas and you get that peak value where you can sell it to someone and say, okay, here's what, we know now that this is the situation. We know this and this situation and everything like that. And you can just say like, all right, I'm going to sell him now and get out and get a younger asset in return.
I will buy him if I can buy him cheap. I'm just telling you right now. That's how I look at it. If some people are really disenfranchised or like, somebody's worried that one of these guys is the quarterback and they don't like that scenario, I think you can buy him cheap, and if you can, I would. Because once again, as Kyle's saying, he's going to have some big games regardless. Okay, he's still Michael Thomas. And I think if you buy him at wide receiver 2 price, and I think that he has those wide receiver 1 games still in him, I think that's a win. But again, be very careful what kind of assets you give up to acquire. I want to talk about the Carolina wide receivers.
Go ahead. With that, Joe. Yeah. With Michael Thomas, if I can get him for an early second round pick, I'm doing that. Like 100%. But I just don't think that you're going to be able to do that.
If you can do it with a pick and a player, I think you think about it. I mean, it might be like a wide receiver 3-ish high end kind of, or I'll give you, for instance, if you could get that deal done, let's say with another guy on this list, Corey Davis, and a second round pick, would you do that for Michael Thomas? Would that be enough? Would that be enough, number one, to get it done? And number two, is that something you'd give up in order to acquire the chance of Michael Thomas? I say yes.
It might be enough to get it done, and if it is, then I think I'll pull the trigger on that. But it's all going to be relative. And again, you led off with Michael Thomas saying like a fall from grace. Like this was in consideration with Christian McCaffrey for the 101 in Dynasty startups.
In many ways safer because people weren't saying, we don't have to worry about the injury quotient as much, and look what happened.
Yep, exactly. So I think, it's nowhere near the value of what you had with MT last year, but yet, if you can get him for that price tag, then I think I'd pull the trigger.
Let's talk about the Carolina boys for a second. They got a new quarterback here in Sam Darnold, or at least we think that's the way things are going here, we assume. DJ Moore and Robby Anderson. Now, Robby Anderson early on just kind of was blowing the doors off things, and then we saw more DJ Moore as things kind of crept in there, and then of course Curtis Samuel started to kind of emerge as well in this offense in the latter part of the season. So my question to you is, now you have a bit of unknown. Does that create a market for Robby Anderson and DJ Moore where people are afraid or hesitant because they don't know what's going to happen with Sam Darnold? And are you one of these people speculating that it could even uptick a little bit and get better for these guys? Are you buying or selling them?
It's an incomplete puzzle right now because you have Curtis Samuel, who has moved on to Washington, and they've replaced him with David Moore. David Moore is like the wide receiver 3 on this roster. Now, I expect that they'll add someone in the draft now for the slot receiver position, or maybe even outside, and they kick DJ Moore inside. Like, there are some possibilities here, but it really is just an incomplete puzzle. So you've got to, again, kind of forecast as a dynasty manager and forecast and say, what do I believe to be reality next season, and take a chance on that. Robby Anderson reuniting with Sam Darnold, I think, is really, really good. Robby Anderson has talked about how his time in New York, he kind of lost his love for football. It just wasn't fun. And
Adam Gase will do that.
Adam Gase will do that too. Mm-hmm. We get that. And he came alive last year. And yes, you saw kind of in waves. You saw Robby Anderson contribute. Then you saw DJ Moore. Then Curtis Samuel. So there really wasn't any consistency there with Teddy Bridgewater. With Robby Anderson, I'm buying because I think that his age is a factor where you can get him kind of cheap. If you can get him as that wide receiver 3, wide receiver 4 depth piece for your roster, then great. That's a solid depth piece that I want for my roster because I do think that he has the potential to have some big games as a flex option for me. With DJ Moore, you're going to have to pay up just because of the name recognition. Mm-hmm. I am not selling DJ Moore, though. If with the possibility that they keep David Moore as that wide receiver 3, he plays on the outside, and DJ Moore moves into a full-time slot role in this offense, we saw what Jamison Crowder was for fantasy football with Sam Darnold. We saw what Braxton Berrios was for fantasy football because just purely he played at the slot position on the roster, on the offense. So if DJ Moore, if you combine the talent with the just target workload that he would get, you're talking about a top 10 fantasy wide receiver next season. So I've got to see what the draft plays out. Do they add that outside receiver? Do they add a slot receiver? Then that kind of will shift things. But either way, I'm not moving off of DJ Moore, and I think that you can buy Robby Anderson pretty cheap right now.
I agree. I'm 100% with you, and I'm not selling DJ Moore either. I just love that talent. 2 years ago, it just could not get enough DJ Moore, all the shares, and it was a glorious thing. And don't worry about the touchdowns. The touchdowns eventually will come. Touchdowns can be arbitrary at times, but we'll see how things go now with Sam Darnold at QB. Before we talk about some more wide receivers, I want to take a moment to recognize sponsor of today's show, Blue Chew, who's making waves and bringing more confidence in the bedroom. Blue Chew is a unique online service that delivers the same active ingredients as Viagra and Cialis, but in chewable form and at a fraction of the cost. Blue Chew's tablets combat all forms of ED and help men gain extra confidence when it comes time to perform. Men, don't be embarrassed about ED. Be embarrassed about not doing something about it. Blue Chew is that opportunity. It's an online prescription service, no doctor visits, no awkward conversations, and it ships right to your door in discreet packages so nobody has to know. The process is simple. You sign up at BlueChew.com and consult with one of their licensed medical providers. And once you're approved, you'll receive a prescription within days. And the best part is it's all done online, which is easy, okay? You don't like swallowing pills? No problem. It's, again, chewable tablets, okay? And I'll tell you right now, we've got a great offer for everybody out there. So if you want to benefit from extra confidence when it comes time to perform, visit BlueChew.com for more details and important safety information. And once again, for our specific listeners here, you can try Blue Chew for free when you use our promo code FantasyPros. Again, that's one word, FantasyPros, at checkout, and pay just $5 shipping. That's BlueChew.com, promo code FantasyPros, and receive your first month for free. And we thank Blue Chew for being a sponsor of the podcast today. Now, going back to wide receivers here, Mr. Yates, let's talk about one that has a new home, and it's Kenny Golladay. Because whenever somebody gets a new landing spot and a new address, typically people get more excited. And I understand people were kind of saying, well, the Lions, they really had a whole host of other problems. But is he going from one problem-riddled situation to another here with the Giants? Does his value uptick a little bit in your opinion? Or is this the perfect opportunity to maybe sell off Kenny Golladay off of the promise of what he could be? Because in realistic terms, you've still got Saquon Barkley, hopefully, being the focal point of that offense, and Daniel Jones, who, although has moments, still turns the ball over a lot, and at the end of the day, that's going to prohibit fantasy productivity. So what's your take on Golladay and Dynasty? Are you buying him, or are you selling him as an asset?
I talked about Kenny Golladay landing in New York and saying that it really didn't move him a ton in my rankings compared to the Matthew Stafford Detroit Lions. Now, when we looked at Jared Goff, that was like Kenny Golladay. I was like, I don't want him anywhere near my dynasty rosters because I'm not a Jared Goff guy. So with Golladay now landing in New York, yes, I think that he can be very, very productive in his limited opportunity. And I say limited opportunity because there are a lot of mouths to feed in this offense. When you really sit down and you look at it, New York is still going to want to be a ground and pound football team. With Daniel Jones on those read options and, play action boots and stuff like that, he's going to be effective and take away some of that rushing opportunity. You have Saquon Barkley. They spent the number 2 overall pick on him. They're going to run him into the ground if they can, and he can be very, very effective. They're going to try to rely on their defense and running the football. That creates 30 pass attempts a game? Well, then you have Kenny Golladay, you have Darius Slayton, you have Sterling Shepard when he's healthy, Evan Ingram, Kyle Rudolph, Saquon Barkley out of the backfield. You added Devontae Booker too. Suddenly now this is a very, very loaded offense, and the opportunities there really aren't, the path for opportunity really isn't there. So with Kenny Golladay, he's going to get his 4, 5, maybe 6 targets per game. And then you need him to convert on, you need him to have a very, very high catch percentage and a deep target rate downfield to be able to supply fantasy value, at least to the high end wide receiver 2 value. He's going to have to score a lot to be able to keep that value as well. So Kenny Golladay, if I can sell him for someone who is just locked in that he is going to be he's going to get 10 targets per game here in New York, and he's going to be the man, and he's a top 5 receiver or anything like for 2021. If I can find someone who's a little bit overzealous, then I'll sell. I will sell nearly any dynasty asset for someone that is willing to overpay. So in this situation, if I can find that person in my league, I'm more than willing to do it, because the path there for Kenny Golladay to return to get to soak up targets just isn't there.
I'm selling Kenny Golladay too, and Kenny Golladay for me is just a player that I love the talent. But Matthew Stafford to Daniel Jones is a different kind of step down. It just is. So whatever you think about the Detroit Lions, you can make all the jokes you can. Matthew Stafford's a pretty good quarterback in this league, and he has been for some time. And he does not get enough credit, I think. And maybe this year with the Rams, he'll get a little bit more. But for me, this is a perfect opportunity because there's been so much hype around this player and constantly about what he could be. But at the end of the day, what could he be in this offense? And I think Yates makes some great points here about all the other mouths that are out there and how much opportunity is Golladay going to really have under Daniel Jones. And what if Daniel Jones doesn't play well? What if Saquon gets hurt again? Then what happens? And that's a distinct possibility. That's 2 years in a row here with Saquon. We see when he's not on the field what Daniel Jones looks like. Spoiler alert, it's not good. By the way, do you know any Jared Goff fans? I know you mentioned that at the top of this rant. I don't know. I mean, maybe his parents love him. Probably, I imagine.
Well, apparently Brad Holmes is, because he traded for him. So, I mean, the GM in Detroit, I mean, maybe. But
Brad Holmes and Mr. and Mrs. Goff. There you go. That's good. Yeah. And that's good. That's all you need. That's all you need sometimes. And good luck to him. Speaking of Jared Goff, how about Cooper Kupp, who he's leaving behind there? I'm a big Van Jefferson guy. I know you know that, and I'm kind of curious to see your take here on Cooper Kupp, because Once again, good talent, very steady receiver, has had some injury issues. Size, you can argue, again, long-term durability, what that's going to look like. Do you think Cooper Kupp is in an interesting scenario here where he's getting Stafford, where people might overrate him and you could sell him off for a bit more than he's worth?
I really don't have a feel or a pulse on Cooper Kupp and his dynasty value, right? Are people excited about Matthew Stafford? Are they now concerned that he's getting a little bit older here? Like, what's the feeling on Cooper Kupp? And I really haven't been able to nail that down. Regardless, I think that I might be willing to go out and just see and send out feelers for Cooper Kupp to see what his price tag is in my league. If it's something that I feel is worth it to be my wide receiver 2 or 3 on my dynasty roster, then I'll make that move, because I really am excited about Matthew Stafford coming here and what this does for this offense. Sean McVay just said, you know what, we've been kind of just, the offense has been pulling along Jared Goff. Let's get the quarterback who can pull this offense along. And that's a scary thing to have, right? Where you think about how good this offense has been in years past, and now with Cam Akers and Robert Woods, Cooper Kupp, just the offensive weapons that they've got now with Matthew Stafford. I'm really excited about it. So I think Cooper Kupp is a buy for me if I can get him at the right price. If his price tag comes back where it's, a top 5 rookie pick or something like that, then that's not it for me. But I am really excited here about Cooper Kupp and Matthew Stafford.
The jersey behind Kyle Yates is Odell Beckham, and I want to know if you're buying or selling him in Dynasty right now, because we all know the talent, we all know the superstar situation that surrounds him always, and the superstar hype that he gets, and the superstar value. But at this point in his career, is he worth that? Can you sell him off of the name brand recognition of Odell Beckham? And if so, how much can you get for him?
I definitely don't think that you can sell Beckham for peak value right now, but he is one of the players that I'm buying. I put out a tweet a couple months ago saying that the 2 players that I am aggressively pursuing in all my dynasty leagues are Joe Mixon and OBJ. And it is not, they obviously absolutely come with the injury concerns, but it's the price tag. It's the price tag and the cost that you are going to have to pay to get them on your rosters. And for example, in a league that I'm in with a bunch of other industry guys, I got OBJ as my wide receiver 3 or 4 on my roster, and I traded Tyler Boyd for him and flipped second-round picks. I had an earlier second-round pick and flipped it for a later one. And I feel like
that's a fair value. I think that's a really fair value for both sides, I would say.
Yeah,
Tyler Boyd was no slouch, but if they bring another wide receiver, that could hurt him. Like if Jamar Chase ends up being the pick, well, that's you look like a genius right there potentially.
Right.
But I think that's a fair value.
Yeah, and OBJ, they're good. I think you saw what the offense looked like when you don't try to force things his way. So next season with this offense, with it being in year 2 under Kevin Stefanski, they've got things clicking. Like Cleveland's a good team. They've got things clicking on offense now. Do they let OBJ be a part of the offense rather than the focal point and trying to force things his way? And if that's the case, then we could see things open up for him. And so to be my wide receiver 3, where he comes with the talent level that I can get those big boom performances out of him, I still feel like that's really, really good value. And to the point where, it's not like he's going to have the games where he gets 3 targets. Like, he's OBJ. He's still going to be fed the ball, but yet not force-fed the ball. There's a difference there.
I want to talk about 2 wide receivers. Now, last year, they were rookies, and the rookie class was brilliant, but I feel like the rookie class kind of left these 2 guys behind. I feel like they went to summer school this year, and maybe we'll see how things go for them because... And let me tell you, these are guys who were taken at the top of that class. It's Henry Ruggs and Jalen Reagor. Now, I want to know, either of these guys, is this an opportunity here to buy on the talent? Because clearly the teams loved them. That's why they drafted them as highly as they did last year in the first round. But clearly last year was a disappointment for a myriad of reasons. We could all talk about them. Everybody knows them. But is there one of these guys in particular, or maybe both, that you think this is a perfect opportunity to go and buy them? Or maybe the inverse. Maybe it's a perfect opportunity to sell these guys off because you just don't believe these teams got it right when they selected these 2 guys.
You are definitely not going to be able to sell either Jalen Reagor or Henry Ruggs. Like, their value right now is dirt cheap. Unless you can find the person in your league who is the biggest Jalen Reagor stan on the planet. And, they're willing to go and just get him on their roster. But again, at that point, you're selling him dirt cheap compared to what you paid for him last year. So it's kind of one of those situations that if you've got both of these guys on your roster, you most likely just need to ride it out and wait for that big boom performance from one of them, and then you ship them off. So Reagor, I'm not going after. That's because I'm not the biggest Jalen Hurts guy, where I don't want to buy into the hype here. I think that we could be we could be witnessing a Drew Lock Part 2 situation where, at the end of the 2019 season, Drew Lock had those 5 games. He looked fantastic, and then everyone was building up the hype. And then it's the same thing with Jalen Hurts. And yes, it's different because Hurts has that rushing value for fantasy football,
Right.
but yet I've got the larger sample size to look back on with my work yet watching him from Alabama to Oklahoma and saying he really did not impress me much as a passer. So with Reagor and how little he did to prove my pre-draft evaluation, I think I had him at wide receiver 5 or 6 last year. I didn't have him above the other guys. I'm fine just letting someone else try to deal with that situation and ride that out. With Henry Ruggs, I am a little bit more willing to go after him and acquire him dirt cheap because I had him as my wide receiver 2 coming out last year. I was a big fan of Ruggs and what he could be. Now it is a situation where he's being a little bit miscast in this offense, where they were using him as that deep field option, and that's just not what he needs to be utilized as. You need him to be that underneath and let him create with his speed and athleticism after the catch. They bring in John Brown this offseason to be that field stretching option. You have Bryan Edwards there as that possession receiver underneath. I do think that we're going to see a step forward from him. Now do they move Henry Ruggs to the slot? With the offensive line woes that we saw, where they are going to have to throw the ball a little bit more than I think they would like, or that they're planning on, then Ruggs could be that guy who's heavily targeted underneath. They're going to try to make it work with him because of the draft capital, because he was the first receiver taken last year. So
Right.
all this, I'm a little bit more willing to go after Henry Ruggs because I believe in the talent a little bit more than Reagor.
Let's talk about some quarterbacks and tight ends before we close things out here today with the mailbag, answering some of your questions here in these dynasty buy and sells. Let's talk about Carson Wentz, Indianapolis Colts. Is this an interesting opportunity to buy back in on a guy? We saw what a difference a line makes for Phillip Rivers year over year. We see historically how good Carson Wentz was when Frank Reich was around him. Is this the perfect opportunity to maybe get this guy for a song and maybe get him back to an MVP caliber discussion? Now, obviously, it's a lot harder now in this league, some of the quarterback play to get there. But still, I mean, he's certainly set up for potential success here. Is this a great opportunity, even in, let's say, even Superflex Dynasty leagues, where Carson Wentz might be a really good buy right now?
Sure, there are a lot of things that you can point to and say, this is the path for success. This is how we get Carson Wentz back to being a top-tier fantasy quarterback. But yet there are a ton of risks, right? What happens if this doesn't happen? So baking in that risk is going to lower the cost of investment, right? The price tag that I'm willing to spend here. So if I can get Carson Wentz for the price tag of a low-end QB2, like if I can sell somehow Tua for Carson Wentz, then I'm doing that move because I want to buy in a little bit more on Carson and his situation for all the reasons that you mentioned. Like I'm willing to do that a little bit more. But if I have to spend the value of a top 15 quarterback, then I'm not willing to do that. I think that there is some risk here that it doesn't all pan out for Carson Wentz in Indianapolis.
That Tua one is fascinating because I am in agreement with you. I think I would do the same. Like if that gets me Carson Wentz, I'm in. Like I'm going to try to make that work because I don't think he's done yet. I think he's too high of a caliber guy. I remember, I'm old enough to remember when Carson Wentz was really good and he was the toast of the town and everybody kept talking about this guy as, oh my goodness, the Eagles franchise future quarterback. And it wasn't like a game or two. It was quite a long period there, quite a long stretch where he looked outstanding. To that point, too, kind of in the same universe, is Sam Darnold in a scenario now where he is set up for success. We talked about Carolina. It feels like the entire Carolina Panthers are the theme of this show. And it seems like we're basically saying, yeah, we want them all. But does that also go for Sam Darnold? Because is it too big to fail? I mean, are we putting him here with getting him out of New York, getting him a great running back, the best in the league, arguably, giving him 2 great wide receivers, one of which he's already familiar with? I mean, are we just basically saying, hey, Sam Darnold is a guy also in Superflex Dynasty formats where you should be buying him?
Yeah, man, this, again, depends on the price tag. I'm not willing to spend...
I imagine it's cheap, no?
It's definitely more expensive than what it was 2 weeks ago,
Fair.
where you could have gotten Sam Darnold for nothing, right? People were just willing to write him off because you thought that he was going to be the backup there. You didn't know what the situation that he was going to land in. Now you are probably going to have to pay a little bit more, but yet I still don't think that it's going to be a ton. Now it all comes down to whether you believe in Sam Darnold and whether you believe that Joe Brady can fix him, because yes, he does need some fixing. He's still only 23 years old, though. Keep that in mind in case you haven't been told that, which at this point you most likely have been, that Sam Darnold is 23 years old. So
if not, we just told you.
Yeah, if not. So with Sam Darnold, I think that you have to buy into that and you have to take a little bit of a chance here. this is part of the fun of Dynasty, that you have to make some of these calls that are unproven, that you're going to have to take some chances. But where Sam Darnold and what Sam Darnold is going to cost you, I think that it might be worth the chance and the risk there. But again, I'm not going too crazy here. I'm not spending the top 15 value to go acquire Sam Darnold. Maybe not even top 20.
This one might be controversial, and that's why I want to talk about it. I want to talk about Jalen Hurts, because I feel like there are two camps right now developing in the fantasy community. One of which is the, hey, let's pump the brakes and let's see what Jalen Hurts really is. And then there's the people that want to make him a top 5 fantasy quarterback. And I get where everybody is. I am probably more in the pump the brakes because quarterback is pretty deep, and I don't want to get quarterback wrong, because if I get it wrong, I'm falling behind the pack immensely nowadays. Okay, quarterback has evolved. The guys at the top are much better than the guys in the middle at the bottom now. So that being said, are you in a position now, if you have Jalen Hurts, that you actually might test the waters for trades, because there might be somebody in that other camp I talked about that is willing to overpay, and if so, is this the time to pull the trigger on it?
There are two sides of looking at this. One is the redraft angle, and the other one is the dynasty perspective.
Right.
From redraft, I'm fine. Of course, it's going to depend on what his ADP
You sounded like Ross from Friends for a second. I'm fine.
I'm fine.
Are we going to have fajitas
Totally
after the
fine.
show, you and I?
Okay. Margaritas too. So with... You sidetracked me. With Jalen Hurts, I'm fine investing in Jalen Hurts for fantasy next year as long as it's not at a QB5 price tag. If it's around QB10, sure, sign me up. I'll take this shot on that, because this team is not going to be very good next year. You look at the offense, you look at all the holes that they have on their roster, they're not going to be very, very good next year. You fast forward, and that can lead to just a ton of Jalen Hurts creating on his own, playing that backyard football that that he excelled in this past season. Like, I think that he can be very, very productive for you. Fast forward to 2022, Philadelphia has 3 first-round picks next year.
Right.
If Carson Wentz ends up meeting the thresholds. If that's the case, then they are going to think very long and hard about taking a quarterback next year, right? We can point to it looks like it's a 3-man race right now, but we didn't see Joe Burrow coming. We didn't see Zach Wilson coming.
It's
like
true.
These players rise, and you are going to have some competition there and some valuable options.
Kyler Murray's another one.
Right, exactly. That Philadelphia can look at next season and say, yes, we'll send away these first 2-round picks, or first 2 first-round picks if we're not in that range, and we'll go get one of these guys to be our long-term answer that meshes with the current coaching staff. So long-term, I'm more willing to sell Jalen Hurts right now, because I don't believe in 2022, unless he just comes out and absolutely just puts an MVP season together, which I don't think is going to happen, that he is going to be the starter in 2022. I think that they're going to reinvest in the quarterback position. So
current coaching staff, I think, is the key there. That to me is why I sell too.
Right. So if I can if I can find that guy who is thinking that they are going to be a top 5 quarterback and they're playing dynasty in the short term, they're not thinking long term, then yeah, sign me up. I'll take that top 5 pick.
I think you could find more than one in your league. I'm just telling you. I think there's enough from what I've seen on the Twitterverse that I think there's a few out there that are going to bite, and I think maybe even overpay 1 or 2. So let's talk about some tight ends real quick. I want to rapid fire these. Mark Andrews, great year 2 years ago, down year last year. I think they got a little predictable. Would you buy or sell Mark Andrews in Dynasty?
I don't think that you're selling him at peak value. The role of Hayden Hurst in that offense is flying under the radar, right? Because that was the move tight end, the ability to utilize and create space for Mark Andrews deeper down the field, deep down the seam, where you had that threat. They didn't have that role in the offense last year. So I think that they're going to invest in that in some way. Maybe Josh Oliver is it, right? They traded for Josh Oliver from Jacksonville. Maybe he fills that role. So I think moving into next season, I think that it's going to be a bounce back year for Mark Andrews. I don't think that you're going to get that top 5 value that I think he deserves to be looked at and viewed at. So I don't think you're going to get that. So I think that you kind of just hold on to Mark Andrews. If you have a need at the tight end position and you're willing to, pay that tight end 7, tight end 8 price tag, then sure, go after him. But I don't think that you should be selling Mark Andrews right now.
Robert Tonyan kind of came out of nowhere. Is this the perfect opportunity to sell high?
I'm going after Robert Tonyan.
Still
really young. He's only, Ray and I joke about this all the time on the podcast where, he told people to go after Tonyan. This was back in the season before he put together the string of solid consecutive performances. And I just had this in my mind that Tonyan had been in the league for like 6 years, 7 years.
No.
Like I thought he was a proven veteran, right? Like that's just kind of the mentality and the image that I had of him in my mind. And then no, he's only been in the league for 3 seasons. Like he's still really young. He's got the chemistry with Aaron Rodgers. So I think I'm going after Robert Tonyan. I've got him as a top 10 dynasty tight end right now. And yes, I think that his value is inflated because Aaron Rodgers is in town. So next year, the year after that, whatever happens with the Green Bay quarterback situation, that could change things. But for right now, I'm going after Robert Tonyan.
What about Mike Gesicki? Because certainly there's an opportunity where Kyle Pitts does fall to Miami. Is this the preemptive, let's move on from Gesicki just in case, and maybe we get another tight end who's decent enough back in that deal that we could kind of, point things together a little bit and pull it all and make it worth the while and make sense on a roster? Because I've never been the biggest Gesicki guy, and that looming possibility of Kyle Pitts to me is just very real.
I am really glad that you included his name here because I think that this is the perfect time to think ahead a little bit and get out. No matter, even if Kyle Pitts doesn't end up being the pick, and Kyle Pitts, for those who are not aware, is the tight end out of Florida coming out, is widely considered.
Be aware, everybody. Public service announcement right here on Fantasy Pros Football Podcast. Be aware of Kyle Pitts, okay?
Yeah, generational prospect. Go watch some of his highlights on YouTube. You will be an instant fan. So I think with Pitts potentially falling to number 6 there with Miami, even if that doesn't happen, you've got Devontae Parker, you've got Will Fuller now, you've got their commitment. They're going to add someone else, maybe even 2 other receiving options. Maybe they get a Brevin Jordan or a Pat Freiermuth. They've still got they've got a couple of second-round picks. So these other guys that they could invest to upgrade over Mike Gesicki, even if they don't bring in competition, he's got competition elsewhere on the roster. So the situation for Gesicki is never going to be the same, where he was the only option in town and he could provide fantasy value from that perspective. So I think selling Gesicki, I don't know if you're going to be able to just like outright sell him. I think it's going to have to be something where you package him in a trade as a part of a larger deal. But if that happens, if you're able to do that, I'm perfectly fine moving on from Gesicki.
Yeah, I want to move on. I'm ready. I want to move on. I just think it's a very high probability from all the mocks we've done that it's just going to be impossible for Miami to pass on Kyle Pitts. And you know what? I wouldn't if I was them. Sorry, right. I just wouldn't. Especially with all the picks they have. You have the luxury to take that kind of stab at tight end. And then you can figure out the rest of it later with all the other picks you have. That, to me, is the whole point of building all the picks, is to have the luxury to take the BPA who falls to you, and he is the difference maker guy. This is a loaded one, so now we're going to do both jerseys behind Kyle Yates today. We're going to do Jonnu Smith next. Now, I know some people are saying that they want to sell him. I don't. I want to buy. I think Bill Belichick went after him for a reason, because they have a clear path, and I understand Hunter Henry's there, and we've had this conversation. It's not stopping me. Hunter Henry is not stopping me from being high on Jonnu Smith. I think I have him at 7 overall, my tight end, or maybe 8. I got to go back and look where I had him today. But to me, I think this is a great opportunity, because I feel like there's some skepticism now with Hunter Henry, and this might be the last opportunity to buy Jonnu Smith, because I do believe he is going to be a difference maker tight end in fantasy for a few years to come here. What are your thoughts on Jonnu Smith, dare I ask? Because I feel like I'm asking the president of the fan club, but hey, look, I was with you last year when I came on as a guest on many of the shows and we talked about him. I'm still a fan now. What are your dynasty expectations in terms of trade value for Jonnu right now?
Yeah, it's hard because you had the wide range of emotions here, where you went from Jonnu being that early sign in free agency, the early signing, and then of course immediately afterwards, the next day you find out that Hunter Henry is signed there, so it kind of comes crashing back down. So now it's like, okay, where did it settle? I don't know where the landscape on Jonnu has really settled. I've got him at tight end 10 or tight end 11 in my dynasty rankings, which really wasn't that far off from where he was in Tennessee. I do think that he is going to be heavily involved, but yet the question now becomes, what does that involvement look like in a low passing volume offense if Cam Newton is the quarterback next season? So all this kind of goes together to just say, like, I'm good acquiring Jonnu if I can get him cheap. If I can find that person in my league who thinks that Hunter Henry is more of a threat than he actually is, and I can get Jonnu at that, tight end 14, tight end 15 price tag, if I can get him for a second-round pick, a third-round pick, then sign me up. But yeah, I think that I don't know if you're going to be able to do that. So it's one of those situations where I said I don't have the pulse on this player. I don't have the pulse on Jonnu, which is weird because I'm like you
We've
said,
come full circle
fan.
Here today.
I know.
No,
I just don't.
Nice
I don't know.
You've talked me off the ledge on Joe Mixon, and now I'm going to talk you off the ledge on Jonnu Smith and say it's okay. Come back to the fold. We've got snacks. We're going to make this all work. It's going to be great. I'm telling you.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that he can still provide fantasy value, but to the point of where it was projecting and where it was going with him signing early on in free agency, it's just not going to be there.
I think it still might. I think it might surprise you, but we shall see. Let's see what the people have to say. We are the People Show. Let's start with Nick S. at L4NKY Guy. This is a perfect question for today's show because we just talked about this player. If the Eagles take Smith or Waddle in the draft, is Hurts worth the hold and wait and see, or sell high as possible? Because obviously those are some even bigger names to talk about. So that is fascinating. So we were talking about kind of before the draft. Now what about after the draft? What if they do draft one of these guys? Does that change your perspective for Hurts? Or if anything, does it give you more of an impetus to go, oh my God, now I can get the moon and the stars for Jalen Hurts?
Yeah, I really do think that it moves more towards your previous evaluation on Hurts and where you stood, and then the value game that you can play in Dynasty. If you can sell him off, again, don't forget that unless they make a drastic move back up and they send away another one of those first round picks that they just acquired, which is not going to happen, then they're, the investment level that the potential that they draft another quarterback in 2022 is still there. So all that just goes together for me to say, one, I don't think one of those guys is going to be there at number 12 overall. I think that they take a corner if one is still there, whether it is Patrick Surtain or JC Horn, right? And then, so all that just kind of goes together for me to say, like, I don't think that it's going to be the pick, but if it is, I am using that as leverage to get as much value as I can.
Connor at ConbonFF wants to know, buy or sell Ezekiel Elliott. We did not touch on Elliott. This is an interesting one because there's a huge market of Cowboy fans out there, and I don't know where they all stand here with Ezekiel Elliott, but where do you stand with Ezekiel Elliott when it comes to his dynasty value?
If you can get Elliott for low-end RB1 price tag, then I'm fine pulling the trigger on that. If you can get him as a solid RB2 for your roster, you compare him with a Aaron Jones. You compare him with a Jonathan Taylor if you've got him. You compare him so where he isn't like the cornerstone of your dynasty roster, then I'm perfectly fine with that. If you have to make a move where you have to send away enough draft capital or draft ammunition to get Zeke to be your RB1 and you're like relying on him to carry your dynasty roster into 2021 in the future, that's a situation where I'm not super comfortable.
All right, Otto Harris at Otto Harris 14 wants to know, Derrick Henry, if you sell, what do you get in return? I don't want to sell Derrick Henry right now. I know there's a lot of people who are saying, this is the time, you got to do it. I'm not. I'm going to go ride this train one more year at least and see where it goes and where it takes me. That's where I'm at. So for me, it's a no, because I feel more secure with Derrick Henry, even though he might not have the CMC upside in terms of overall fantasy productivity. I feel warm and fuzzy, like I'm in my sheets rock kind of thing, where I am feeling really good about Derrick Henry right now, and I'm going to resist that temptation and the fear factor, because I think that's what it is the fear factor of the amount of touches, and maybe after this 17-game season, you can get back to me and see how I feel. Where do you feel about Derrick Henry right now in Dynasty?
It's weird to say that Derrick Henry isn't like the flashy player that you want on your dynasty roster, because he absolutely is. But when you sit down and you say Derrick and you like rely on Derrick Henry to be your RB1 for fantasy, projecting forward, it doesn't feel that great because he doesn't come with that pass catching upside. But when you're in the middle of your season and you know that he's getting those 20 carries a game and he's just producing, then that's a different situation. So I'm more willing to hold on to Derrick Henry right now. Again, it goes back to what we talked about at the top of the episode, saying that the value game is so hard to pinpoint and say, like, what you asked, like, what can I get for Derrick Henry? I don't know. I honestly don't know, because each league is different.
I don't know if there's a trade you can get, Kyle, that makes enough sense to move him because of that. Like, it would have to be a massive overpay. Like, you would have to get a top 4 pick overall in the rookie draft for me.
Right.
You would have to be getting one of those Najee Harris type guys back. Right. Plus. And I think, I don't know if somebody's willing to do that for Derrick Henry. They might in Dynasty, and if they are, I think you consider it. But honestly, it takes an overpay, and that's okay. It's okay to take and receive the overpay and go, you know what, that's so much I can't say no. That's fair, because eventually they all do expire. And that's the case.
The only reason that you would be selling Derrick Henry is the fear of the touches eventually wearing down on him.
Right.
But we have never seen a running back like Derrick Henry, in my opinion. Where
just Earl Campbell, but that was a different era.
where he can handle that type of workload to the point where we feel super comfortable with him for fantasy football. I just don't. Like you said, I'm willing to ride this one out.
All right, last one here. Harvey Smith at HKSmith03 wants to know, where can we read Tag's vacation primer? I didn't see it on the website. Harvey, it is behind a paywall. So look, you got to. It's a special thing we've got set up there where the only way you can see the vacation primer for tags is, you got to pay all this extra money and do these extra things. But you can do that. And we've got all these great services here, again, at FantasyPros.com. I mentioned earlier, we talked about the Dynasty Draft Simulator at FantasyPros.com Simulator. Also, of course, make sure you subscribe to the Dynasty Football Podcast, hosted by our own Yates here and Reagor. They do a tremendous job. I'm telling you, this is like peak season for them, man. They're getting so hyped for the draft. They're doing such great work. And if you missed it, we just did our last mock draft. Was it 4.0? I think we're up to 4 now. We did 2 rounds of it last week. We're all losing track. We don't even know how many we're doing there. I'm almost positive it was 4, but it was glorious. You could check it out on Fantasy Pros on YouTube channel as well and watch the draft board, which, by the way, fantastic work. All the people behind the scenes working that video. That video is hot, let me tell you. And you know what's cool is My Sheets rock once again. So I want to remind everybody, if you want, you go out there, you get 10% off and free shipping at mysheetsrock.com/pros. Again, that promo code is pros, all one word. And make sure you also go check out our other sponsor of today's show. They've got special deals at Blue Chew for you. Go to bluechew.com and for free, you can use the promo code FantasyPros and check out with $5 shipping, so you can get a free sample there. Again, bluechew.com. The fantasy code is FantasyPros. That's one word, to receive your first month for free. And I want to thank Blue Chew for being a sponsor of the show. And go get that Justin Jefferson jersey, for God's sakes. FantasyPros.com/contest. All you got to do is take a little time, write a nice review, screenshot it, fill out the form, and boom, you're entered to win. We've got a whole month of April where you can get involved in that, so make sure you go do that as well. And that's thanks to our friends at PristineAuction.com. Yates, tremendous work today. I gotta say, it's so nice that you and I got to spend some quality time one-on-one. This is very nice. Tags will be back sooner than later, and we'll all be back here. And I want to remind everybody, the perfect second screen experience for the NFL draft is me, Yates, and Tags, because we're going to be here doing the live stream, breaking it all down fantasy-wise. Yes, all the NFL people do a great job, but that's just more real football. We want the fantasy side of things, and we're going to give that to you at Fantasy Pros, and that's why you have to subscribe to the YouTube channel at Fantasy Pros, because that night, we're going to be live, breaking all the picks down, what it means for you, your fantasy teams, your redraft, your dynasty, and everything in between. I think that's it, Kyle. We put in a good day's work here. We're going to step away. We'll be back again later this week. We got more great shows for you coming at you. So that'll do it for us, but the story of the game goes on. For Yates, I'm Joey P. We'll see you next time, kids.
Thanks for tuning in to the Fantasy Pros YouTube channel. Don't forget to check out our featured videos. And while you're at it, make sure to follow us on Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter at Fantasy Pros, so you can get the latest news and updates to give you the edge you need in your fantasy league.